Michael Myers. Michael Myers is the core killer of the Halloween franchise and one of the most feared figures in slasher history. His story begins in 1963, when at just 6 years old, he murdered his sister Judith on Halloween night. He was institutionalized under Dr. Samuel Loomis, who later described him as pure evil, claiming there was nothing behind his eyes but darkness. This idea defines Michael throughout the series. He isn't driven by revenge or personal motives, but rather represents evil in its purest form. 15 years later, he escapes Smith's Grove Sanitarium and returns to Haddonfield to kill again. His style is slow and calculated, stalking victims silently, waiting for the right moment to strike. He rarely speaks, and the blank white mask he wears strips him of all humanity, turning him into what Loomis calls the Shape. His appearance, a pale mask and blue mechanic's jumpsuit, has become one of horror's most recognizable images. Michael's resilience is what makes him so deadly. Across the films, he survives gunshots, stabbings, burns, and falls, only to rise again. Some storylines hint at supernatural causes, while others leave it unexplained, but the result is the same. He feels unstoppable. What separates him from many slashers is his patience. He doesn't rush, he stalks, he waits, and he instills dread long before the kill. More than a man, Michael Myers is the embodiment of the boogeyman, an unstoppable, motiveless force of death. This mix of silence, durability, and sheer presence makes him one of the deadliest slashers of all time. Freddy Krueger. Freddy Krueger is the villain of the A Nightmare on Elm Street series and one of horror's most original slashers. Before his death, he was the Springwood Slasher, a child murderer who escaped justice until the victim's parents burned him alive. Instead of dying, Freddy returned as a dream demon, killing people in their sleep and making him nearly impossible to avoid because everyone has to sleep. His look is iconic, a burned face, striped red and green sweater, fedora, and his bladed glove. Unlike silent killers like Michael Myers or Jason, Freddy talks constantly, mocking his victims with cruel humor. His kills are creative and surreal, shaped by nightmare logic. He twists dreams into weapons and uses personal fears against each victim. Robert Englund's made Freddy both terrifying and charismatic. Later films leaned into his dark comedy, while others emphasized his cruelty, but his core never changed. A sadistic figure who controls the dream world. This combination of power, design, and personality makes him one of the deadliest slashers ever created. Jason Voorhees. Jason Voorhees is the main killer of the Friday the 13th franchise and one of the most recognizable slashers in horror. His story begins with tragedy. He was a young boy who drowned at Camp Crystal Lake due to the negligence of camp counselors. In the first film, it was his mother, Pamela Voorhees, who carried out the murders in revenge. Jason himself took center stage in the sequels, transforming into the hulking, unstoppable killer fans know today. Jason is best known for his hockey mask, introduced in Friday the 13th Part 3, and his machete, though he has used a wide variety of weapons. Unlike Freddy or Chucky, Jason doesn't speak. His silence, massive build, and relentless pursuit make him terrifying. He stalks victims slowly, but never stops coming, creating the sense that escape is impossible. Over the years, Jason has survived shootings, stabbings, drownings, electrocution, and even resurrection, cementing him as more than human. What makes Jason especially deadly is his sheer durability and strength. He's a brute force of nature, killing anyone who enters his territory. The mythology around him shifts across sequels. Sometimes he's human, other times undead, but the result is the same, a silent killer who cannot be stopped. Ghostface. Ghostface is the central killer persona in the Scream franchise, but unlike other slashers, it isn't tied to one person. Instead, the mask and voice are used by different killers in each film, usually characters connected to Sidney Prescott or those obsessed with horror movies and fame. This shifting identity keeps the mystery alive because the audience never knows who is behind the mask until the reveal. The look itself is simple but effective, a long black robe with the white screaming mask, inspired by Edvard Munch's painting The Scream. The costume is mass-produced, which allows anyone to hide behind it. Ghostface's methods are more grounded than other slashers. He uses knives, stalking, prank phone calls, and psychological games. One of his trademarks is calling victims before attacking, taunting them with questions about horror movies and rules, which ties into the franchise's self-aware, meta style. What makes Ghostface deadly is not supernatural strength or invincibility, but unpredictability. Because anyone could be Ghostface, the threat never truly ends. Each killer brings their own motive, revenge, jealousy, or obsession, but the mask makes them all part of the same legend. This flexibility has allowed the character to last for decades while staying fresh. Ghostface is dangerous not because of brute force, but because they play with fear and paranoia. They exploits trust, uses technology, and manipulates victims before striking. Chucky Chucky, also known as Charles Lee Ray, is the killer of the Child's Play franchise. He begins as a notorious serial killer who transfers his soul into a good guy doll using voodoo to escape death. From then on, Chucky uses the doll's small, harmless appearance to his advantage, often gaining access to homes and children before revealing his true nature. One of Chucky's biggest strengths is his deception. As a doll, he can blend into everyday life, hide in plain sight, and strike when no one expects it. Despite his small size, he is surprisingly strong and agile, often overpowering unsuspecting victims through speed, cunning, and brutality. Chucky talks constantly, taunting victims with cruel humor. This makes him more unpredictable. He doesn't just kill, he manipulates and psychologically torments his targets. Another strength is his resilience. Chucky has been destroyed, burned, shot, and dismembered across the films, but he always finds a way to return. Through voodoo rituals or sheer persistence, he repeatedly cheats death, making him difficult to eliminate permanently. Over time, he even learns to split his soul into multiple dolls, multiplying the threat. Norman Bates. Norman Bates is the central character of Psycho. Norman horror comes from his psychology. He runs the isolated Bates Motel with his domineering mother, Norma Bates. But as the story unfolds, it's revealed that Norman murdered his mother years earlier and developed a split personality, keeping her voice and personality alive within his own mind. When he kills, he does so believing he is his mother. Norman's greatest strength lies in deception. On the surface, he appears polite, quiet, and awkward, someone completely harmless. This facade allows him to lure victims, especially travelers who stop at the motel, into a false sense of safety. His intelligence and control over his environment make him dangerous. He knows every corner of the motel and uses that familiarity to his advantage. Psychologically, Norman represents a different kind of killer, one driven by mental instability and deep emotional trauma rather than pure evil. His mother persona is protective, jealous, and violent, while his normal self is timid and conflicted, torn between guilt and denial. This internal battle makes him unpredictable. Norman Bates laid the groundwork for the modern slasher archetype, the disturbed, dual-natured killer who hides monstrous intent behind an ordinary face. His influence can be seen in nearly every slasher that followed, making him one of the genre's deadliest and most important figures. Leatherface. Leatherface is the main antagonist of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. First appearing in Tobe Hooper's 1974 classic, he's portrayed as a physically imposing man who wears masks made from human skin and wields a roaring chainsaw as his signature weapon. He lives with a deranged, cannibalistic family that manipulates and controls him. This dynamic adds a disturbing layer to his character. He's both victim and monster. Though capable of extreme violence, he often shows fear and confusion when punished or scolded by his relatives, suggesting limited understanding and dependence on them. That unpredictability makes him dangerous. He kills without restraint, but not always with clear intent. Leatherface's greatest strength is his physical power. He can overpower nearly anyone with ease, and his use of tools like chainsaws, sledgehammers, and meat hooks makes his attacks swift and devastating. He's fast for his size, capable of explosive bursts of violence that catch victims off guard. Not to mention, his home is filled with bones, skin, and decay, which mirrors his own madness. That disturbing mix of strength, unpredictability, and lack of empathy turned him into a defining figure of horror. Art the Clown. Art the Clown is the sadistic killer from the Terrifier franchise, created by Damien Leone. Dressed in a black and white clown suit with pale makeup, a bald head, and a painted grin, Art is completely silent. He never speaks, laughs, or makes a sound. Instead, he uses exaggerated expressions and gestures like a mime, which makes him unpredictable and deeply unsettling. Art's strength lies in his brutality and creativity. He doesn't just kill, he tortures, mutilates, and stages his victims in grotesque ways. His weapon of choice is often a rusty hacksaw or cleaver, but he uses whatever he can find, from guns to improvised tools. His attacks are slow and deliberate, meant to maximize fear and suffering. What makes Art especially dangerous is his apparent supernatural endurance. Across the films, he has been shot, beaten, and even decapitated, yet always returns. His mix of physical power, sadistic intelligence, and supernatural durability make him nearly impossible to stop. He represents chaos and cruelty without purpose, and his ability to turn humor into horror.